All right, Promineo week 9 project, actually. We are taking a look at, or I am creating a calculator app this week. We had to use Bootstrap, and I didn't feel like just making an HTML and CSS page, so I decided to challenge myself a little bit. So I decided to write some tests, I decided to use TypeScript, and I decided to code up a little mortgage calculator. And I used ChartJS to kind of display the data. Here's how it works. You put in your loan amount, you put in the down payment, you put in the loan term, the start year, and then the interest rate, and it will tell you the data along the top of the screen here, actually, and then it'll actually map out that kind of stuff for you. And it's super easy to do that with ChartJS. You just have to give it a series of data sets, which include like the title, a bunch of different configuration things. The title, the typograph, the data set that you're going to be mapping over, the axis that it's going to be mapping it to, stuff like that. So we're just going to go over here and we're going to take a look at the code. We're going to close that. This is ChartJS. I did a couple of things with this. I wrote out a utility function and a create my chart, which we'll take a look at here in a second. But first, what I did is I got a hold of, excuse me, I got a hold of a couple of elements. I got a hold of the placeholders for all of the data, like the fields on the right over here. That way I can add the inner HTML to them. And I did that actually right here. I set the text content to the data points right there. And then I got hold of the HTML canvas element, which I'm going to use to map my chart to. And then finally, I got a hold of the form that is being submitted. I added an event lister onto the form to cancel the default behavior of a form, which reloads the page in case you didn't know. And then I converted the form data of that form to a JavaScript object using this little like shorthand. In case you didn't know that, you could do that. This is just a TypeScript thing, which basically tells the TypeScript behavior, hey, this is going to be an HTML form element, and there will be data points on it. I then calculated the total number of months, the monthly interest rate, and the principal. I had to convert these over to numbers, otherwise TypeScript was going to complain, which is totally fine. That's the reason why we use it, and the reason why we don't perform operations on strings, right? It's super safe. I set the remaining principal to the principal, which was calculated, which is the total principal, actually. And then I set the total interest to 0 to start. And that's because I'm using these as essentially placeholders to be able to calculate the principal per month and then the interest paid per month. The monthly payment is a calculation that you can find online. It's pretty simple. It's the principal times the monthly interest rate. It's the principal times the monthly interest rate, which is times 1 plus the monthly interest rate raised to the total number of months divided by 1 plus the. You can find this calculation online. It'll be far easier for you to look at that than me to kind of explain this line of code to you. All I did was look up, how do I calculate my monthly interest rate, or not monthly interest rate, but monthly payment for my mortgage, and it kind of popped up something for you. Actually, along that search, I found like the inspiration for the chart that I created, because I had no idea how I wanted to make this chart look, but I actually found one on a mortgage calculator that I tried my best to mimic. And then what I did was I created an array of important mortgage data that I wanted to be able to send to the chart. And I did that by creating an array with the length of that array being equal to the total number of months. And then I mapped over that array and added into it just a really quick short calculation of the year, the month, the interest, the monthly principal, and the remaining principal. And then for every iteration of that loop, I incremented the total interest by the interest that I calculated, as well as, I guess, decreased the remaining principal by the monthly principal. That way it's kind of like decreasing over time as well. because that's going to be something that you want to do. I then set the loan data, which basically is a short utility function I showed you up here on the page, and I created a more useful data set for the chart. I basically reduced it because one thing that I wanted to do was essentially I wanted to be able to calculate on a monthly basis how the interest and the principal affected the remaining balance, but I wanted to be able to map it on the chart in a meaningful fashion. If I did send all of the data over to the chart, then it would just be really slim and slender bars that wouldn't really make a lot of visual sense. So I had to update it, and I basically created a small utility function right here, which takes in an array, and it takes in a number of elements that you want to have, or it takes in a number that essentially filters out the array that's passed in such a way that it returns every in number of elements, right? If you give it a 1, then it returns the first element of that array, right? But if you give it 12, it gives you every 12th element to the array. And I just use 12 because that's how many months are in a year, and then that's also visually more meaningful than 12 times 300 is like 3,600 data points. It's super hard to read, and it was just more visually appealing than that. I did notice a bug when in that it wasn't returning the last element to the array unless I did it in a very specific fashion. And that's not something that I can guarantee for every user's calculation, because maybe they have a 50-year loan, okay? But whatever data that they put in, I wanted to make sure that I returned the last element of the array such that I could show that the balance made it to 0 eventually, which it does make it to 0 eventually. Finally, what I do is I actually create the chart. And that is done in the modules, ChartJS. It imports in ChartJS. I had to create a type for chart data. That way Typescript knew exactly what I was sending to it, so I can get some code completion and stuff. But it takes in the canvas element that we got before. It takes in the chart data, and then it takes in the loan term. And what it does with that is it first checks to see if there's already a chart that exists. Because if you don't destroy the current chart that's on the canvas element that you're passing, ChartJS will encounter an error. So you need to get that chart, and then if it exists, destroy it, so that way you can create the new one on top of it. Next, what it does is it takes in what's the type of chart that you want to create. I created a line chart, but you're not limited by that. You can map multiple charts onto one, and actually I did. First, it takes in the labels, which are the bottom labels of the chart, and that is something I decided to do with the year. And then it takes in a series of data sets that it uses to create the chart. I gave it the remaining balance, the principal, and the interest. And then the data that gets passed over to it is essentially an array of data points, just singular data points. It's not objects. It's just an array of data, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In this case, it was the remaining principal, the monthly principal, and then the interest rate. The bars are mapped over the third axis, which you can actually create by creating a separate axis ID. In this case, I called it payments. I gave it the y-axis ID to the data sets that were relevant, and it created that bar chart effect on the background. ChartJS does have a responsive ability, but it winds up being a little bit wonky. It's something I might have to look into if I ever come back to this project to kind of update, because if you actually take this and you inspect it, and then we swap over into responsive mode, you can see that it works perfectly fine at larger resolutions, but as it gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, it kind of gets wonky to look at. If I go back actually to iPad, it'll fix it, and then if I scale up from here, it doesn't adjust properly. So that's a little bit buggy. I don't know that it's necessarily a problem because users don't really look at the page that way. And if you do end up, scaling the screen by dragging the screen over, you're kind of a weird user in my experience, but or in my opinion, but it is what it is. And then that's all that's for ChartJS actually. I did write a couple of tests. The first was essentially to make sure that I set up just right with Typescript, which is something I wanted to make sure I was doing correctly. And then the second one was actually to test my function, the every nth element. I basically wanted to make sure that it was returning the correct array in like the way that I expected, and then it would also return the first element of the array if I sent in the wrong thing, or I sent in like a 1, right? And that that actually ends up working. Actually, I could probably run a test for you guys. Think about it. npm run test. And boom, passed. Cool. Good to hear. Good to see. I did that with Jest. I didn't do it with Mocha and Chai just because it was easier. And then the last thing, which is really cool, is the My Code section, which is something that I got off of a YouTube video from another coder YouTuber. And it's basically using prismjs to take my code elements and make them look like this. It's super simple. You can go over to their website. They use regex to be able to do it. And they'll actually even give you the CSS and the JS for whatever languages that you're using. And they'll even, where is it? It is, there's Prism CSS. Oh, prismjs. They'll even give you that, right? Which I'm sure that there's another way to be able to do it. I just decided to do it quickly like this. And yeah, it's a really cool way to display code. And they even say on their website that companies like React use it. And they do, as you can tell right here. I think this one's actually editable, which is kind of cool. I kind of want to learn how to do that, but whatever. Actually, I'm kind of curious if it will... yeah, I'm kind of curious if it'll actually render out some... Oh, it does. Isn't that cool? All right, anyways, I'm geeking out. Yeah, so I have to make these editable now. I'm kind of curious at what happens with the... Hang on, let's see. If we go over to my code and then we find one of them, where is it? It's a pre-element, and then I guess it's editable. Yeah. Let's see what happens. I think it was, which one was it? Oh, that's my tests. Let's take a look. No, wait. Nope. Nope. Hang on. Code element. I forget what the content editable. There it is. Let's flip over to that. Content editable. Now let's flip back and see if I can do it. Nope. You. Anyways, it doesn't matter. That's my project for this week. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment.